Hi, everyone. This is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series where we talk about Kenpo principles, concepts, and sometimes we have very special guests with us. Right now, we are having special interviews with the class of 2021 Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame inductees. And we are so honored to have this next gentleman from the great state of Texas. The eyes of Texas are upon you there, Mr. Duffy. So we're going to be talking to Master Duffy, Brian Duffy, and he's going to take us through a journey of his Kenpo, the lessons he learned, things he was shown during his lifetime in his long journey, experiences with the founding Grandmaster Ed Parker and others as well. The Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame members are always chosen by the members, and it's their peers based on their accomplishments, not just because of friendships, which we do have over a period of time. I guess we wear each other down. Eventually we start to like each other because we've survived. So with no further ado, I am very honored to have this next man on. I have great respect for him. He has amazing knowledge of Kenpo. And with that, welcome Master Duffy to the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's truly an honor to speak to you. I've had conversations with you before on some of our video chats, as well as other chats with other programs. So let's just take everybody through a wonderful trip down memory lane with Brian Duffy. Okay. Why don't you tell us, Brian, and I'll call you Brian throughout this if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Okay. Let's take us through how you got into the martial arts. Take us on that journey.
Actually, I was when I graduated high school, I was 5'4" and weighed 110 pounds. I had a very late growth spurt. I was about the same size as all my classmates through about 7th or 8th grade. And then I just kind of stopped, and the rest of them just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I felt the need, being that small, to find some way of defending myself, because I couldn't use my size, obviously, to intimidate anybody. So I was getting ready to go to college. I just graduated high school the May before, and it was end of August, early September. I was driving down to register for classes at San Antonio College, junior college, where I grew up, and I passed a karate school on the way. And after I registered for classes at the college, when I drove back by, I stopped in at the karate school and registered for classes there as well. And interesting story is, the thing that drew my attention to the studio was it said karate and judo. I lived in Japan from ages 2 to 4. Military brat. My dad was stationed there. My older brother, who's 7 years older than me, he did judo when he was there for those 2 years. But I was too young to do anything. So, but my connection to martial arts in my family was my brother doing judo. So I, stopped in and I asked him about judo lessons. And the receptionist said, "Are you interested in self-defense?" I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "Well, we have an introductory course of 5 lessons, and it was a Kenpo school." And so they started showing me stuff. It looked good to me. It looked like it was going to work. I didn't ask about judo anytime after that. And that's how I got started in Kenpo.
Do you speak Japanese?
No, I do not. I was age 2 to 4. I have very few memories of my time in Japan. I was way too young.
What year was it when you first started?
1970.
1970. And you were in this Kenpo school. So tell us about that school. What did you feel you acquired in knowledge, or what kept you there?
I was enjoying learning self-defense. It was a Traco school at the time, and it was a chain school. We had a number of different instructors that moved in and out of that school, and I really, it was okay, but I mean, the school was not, that particular group of schools was not really well respected, to be quite honest with you. It wasn't until 1972, gentleman named Gary Swan came in and he bought the school that I was at. And he became my teacher from purple belt through fourth black. And
tell us about Gary Swan. People
yes,
know who he is.
Gary Swan is a student of Stephen LeBounty. In fact, in 2018 in Tucson, when Mr. LeBounty accepted the rank of 10th, he also promoted both me and Mr. Swan to the rank of 9th at that function. But Mr. Swan has been a student of, he trained in Mr. LeBounty's school in Fresno, which is the same school that started Tom Kelly and Huck Plantis, right? We're both original students of Steve LeBounty's. Mr. Swan was actually a student of Tom Kelly in that dojo. And then Mr. Kelly went to El Paso to open a school, and he became, and that was in '68, and he became a direct student of Mr. LeBounty and continued to be a direct student of Mr. LeBounty up through Mr. LeBounty's passing. He was, at the time I met him in '72, he was the vice president of the National Chinese Kenpo Karate Association, which was Mr. LeBounty's organization. Mr. LeBounty and Mr. Swan and one of Mr. Swan's black belts, Cliff McKinney, had met with Mr. Parker and outlined their vision of a smaller, more family-oriented group. The IKKA was all over the world, and they wanted something more close-knit. So they explained that they weren't trying to break off, and disassociate with Mr. Parker. They still wanted to associate with Mr. Parker, but they wanted this smaller, close-knit group. And Mr. Parker gave them his blessing. And that's how the NCKK started. Mr. Swan was the vice president when I first met him. And then several years later, I think 75 or 76, Mr. LeBounty retired as president because he went into law enforcement for a career and turned the presidency over to Mr. Swan. And Mr. Swan became the president of the NCKK. I served in a number of capacities in the NCKKA. I was I was a camp director for a very short period of time. I was the vice president for a little while, and stayed with Mr. Swan, like I said, from 1972 until I started studying directly with Mr. Parker. And through my association with Mr. Swan, I was able to train with mentors like Mr. LeBounty, who was, I met him in 1973 at the first Texas NCKK camp, and continued to, have him as an influence in my training until he passed. A couple years after that, I think 76 or 77, Mr. Kelly became a senior advisor of the NCKK as well, and I was able to train with him and have him as one of my mentors until his passing as well. So my association with Mr. Swan was a blessing in the fact that not only is he one of the most excellent martial artists I've ever seen, but the people that he put me in contact with was just a blessing in my journey as well.
Interesting. When you're training, you spent time with Mr. LeBounty, Tom Kelly, and obviously Mr. Swan. Was Mr. Swan your primary instructor?
Yes, he was my instructor. Like I say, when he bought the school, I was a purple belt, and my ranks from purple or from blue through fourth black are all under him.
Wonderful, beautiful. And now, you said were you still associated with Mr. LeBounty, or just indirectly through Mr. LeBounty?
Mr. LeBounty was one of the teachers at our training camps every year. I attended training camps not only in Texas, but I went to training camps that the NCKK had in Arizona. Sure. And in California as well. I also, myself and two of my students went out 1 year after their nationals. We spent a week at Mr. LeBounty's house and trained with him directly. Mr. Swan had him come in the '70s and do a week-long training, for all the brown and black belts, so I had he was a great influence on me. They put it that way.
What would be some of the best lessons you learned through the LeBounty lineage? And you can include Tom Kelly and Mr. Swan if you like.
Keep it real. Keep it real. I'm going to tell you an interesting thing that Mr. LeBounty said to me when I got the opportunity to train directly under Mr. Parker. When Mr. Parker indicated to me that if I was to come into the IKKA, that he would take me as a personal student. I went to Mr. Swan and I explained to Mr. Swan, that I had this opportunity. He understood. He, just said, well, Brian, that's great, but you live in Texas, he lives in California. How much time are you really going to have with him? And I said, I've considered that as well, sir, but I want to get as much time as I can. Whatever he wants to give me, I'm going to take. Mr. LeBounty told me, he said, Brian, it's great that you're going to get an opportunity to meet the founder and work with it, not meet the founder, because I've met him several times before, but to be a student of the founder, and you're going to learn how the system has evolved over all the years. Going to learn some very interesting things, but just remember that none of that stuff will work if you can't take a strong stance and punch somebody's lungs out.
Absolutely.
So it was all about being real. It was all about Mr. LeBounty had a 20-year career as in law enforcement. Had to use his skills many times to protect, to keep himself and others safe. And Kenpo can be a very theoretical art, but he was one of the ones that made sure that you understood that, he used to say there's no winners and losers in fights, there's only survivors. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to survive. He used to end his some of his seminars. He'd gather all the people around in a group, and he'd say, he'd take on the part of the bad guy, and he'd say things like, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to mess with you, I'm going to, and he'd get the group to say, not me, not today. Not me, not today. And he'd say something else. I'm gonna take this from you and do something. And everybody say, not me, not today. Very empowering for people.
Sure.
And that was his mindset. That this is something for survival, and this is an art that you, while it has a lot of very, theoretical aspects to it, the true embodiment of it is protecting yourself in a life and death situation.
Absolutely. It's funny. I believe, and I think this is why Parker wanted to work with you. He was focusing on the senior instructors, people that would pass on this art of his, to continue the idea of the thinking man and to evolve it and to grow with it. Yes, you're going to punch their, literally their lungs out, as Mr. LeBounty would say. Trejo said the same thing to me. He says, Pablo, he used profanity though. It was frank. Mr. Parker would say the same thing. But he wouldn't use profanity. He said, Paul, if you're going to get in, you get all the way in. And right. He did that. And there was no hesitation with him. People think that Parker would break down the divisions of the Kenpo into the three parts, obviously basic, self-defense, and freestyling or sparring. But when it came to the sparring, Mr. Parker was thinking about self-defense. He wasn't thinking so much tournament stuff. He left that to the tournament competitors, and he understand what that was. He really did. It's beautiful. It's like a game of chess with no blood. Well, some blood, but with the other thing, he would do his stuff, man. It was over very quickly in seconds.
Yeah.
Because he was always thinking, sir, multiple attackers and things can happen. And you're not looking at all the, the 8 considerations that he has in the Infinite Insights. Great treatises. If you look at that, though, it really guides you back to what you're talking about. You're going to get it on. Right. And Parker was a big advocate of basics. Okay, so you're working with these guys and you're training with them, and now you go over to work with Ed Parker. Was this in the late 70s? Was this in the 80s? When was this?
This was in the 80s. I started having Mr. Parker come out to Texas once or twice a year. First it was once a year, and then it became twice a year in about the mid 80s. And at the time, I was still in the NCKKA, and he was doing seminars. And every time he came out and stayed, he made time for me. He was very generous with his time and said, what would you like to work on? What would you like to talk about? You know, and at the time I was interested in the principles and concepts that, and the terminology as well. I've come to see that a lot of the stuff that he was doing, we still had in the NCKKA, but we didn't have the language. And I wanted to make sure that I understood how to properly present what was going on. So I worked with him for, like I say, every time that he came out, he gave me time. And then I found out that he said, that he indicated to me that if I came into the IKKA, that he would be willing to take me as a personal student. And I always thought if I came into the IKKA, I'd be under some other instructor. And I had a great instructor in Gary Swan. And it was only when he indicated to me that, I could be a personal student that I was motivated to go ahead and make the move to the IKKA. And then I would come out after I was in the IKKA, I would come to California once or twice a year as well. So I was seeing him, several times a year, not as much as I, would have liked. And like everybody, we were expecting to have him around for a lot longer.
Absolutely.
To continue that. But I'm very grateful for the time that I did have with him. I'll give you a funny story. He did a belt test at our school in '89, beginning of '89. And my guys did pretty good. The thing Mr. Parker always used to say about my guys, he'd say, Brian, you guys have great basics. Brian, you guys have great basics. And he loved that. He loved the fact that they had good, strong basics. And so my guys did pretty good. I had one guy went for third, another guy went for second, and about 4 or 5 people went for first, and then some Browns, And so at the end of the belt test, he promoted me to fifth. And he said, based upon some people are promoted based upon their efforts in tests like this, and some people are based upon what they produce, And so he brought me out and he promoted me to fifth. But one of my students, who was supposed to go for second, his name's Brant Hickman. He was a police officer in Plano and on the SWAT team. And the weekend of the test, he was on call, so he could not come down from Dallas to go to the test. And I said, well, don't worry, Brant. I said, I'm going to go out and see Mr. Parker in about a month. And, you can come with me and we can do the test there. And he said, okay. So sure enough, we go out and Mr. Parker picks us up at the airport, takes us over to the house, shows us all around, shows us, the Ed Parker glasses, the Ed Parker ring, the cape in the front there, the Cadillac, and, we got the whole tour, and things are getting, later and later. And I go, well, Mr. Parker, we still got to test Brant. I'm thinking we're going to go down to the studio and, we'll run the test there in the studio. And he goes, okay, tell him to get dressed. And so Brant goes and puts on his uniform, and me and Mr. Parker sitting on his couch in the living room. He goes, run through his stuff. And we tested him for his second degree right there in his living room.
Yeah.
At the end of which, Mr. Parker gave us a lesson on Form 4, some of the differences that Brant was doing, what he wanted to see, And so he runs a lesson on Form 4 for what we were doing. And then he takes us up into the office, pulls out one of his certificates, lays it down, hand letters it himself, right? Signs it, hands it to Brant. So it was a pretty amazing experience, and then we stayed the night at his house.
Ed Parker. That was Ed Parker. He knew this man was qualified. He knew he was ready for it. It was just a formality. And it's funny with Frank, Frank's similar when he went from 6th to 7th, actually most of his ranks. He just knew Mr. Parker knew what Frank could do. And if you knew who Frank Trejo is, he could do what he could do.
Right.
Is that we have it. So let's back up a little bit. Let's go through Brian Duffy's tournament competition and things like that. Why don't you walk us through that? What was it like? When was the first time you competed? What was your lessons from it? And some of the things that you were very proud of, and some of the things that, you learn from those competitions?
Well, I think my first tournament was in '71, I believe, and it was
Good, huh?
it was not a good experience for me. I, I ended up fighting. It was kind of an inter-school tournament, that Traco organization, and there was a guy there at the studio who was a little bit older, and he was one of those guys that all they did was fight. You know, all they did, just love to fight, love to fight, love to fight. And I got put up against him. It was my first, first ever match at the tournament, and he beat me like a redheaded stepchild. I mean, he just was had he he had no mercy on me either. He didn't care. He was out there to to kick ass and take names, and that's what he did. And so my first, in fact, there was about I think there's 30 seconds left, and I'm standing there like like a limp rag doll after he's been beating on me for a minute and a half, and the head referee, who was actually one of the instructors at our school, looks over at me and goes, "Do you want to keep doing this?" And I said, "No." He said, "Okay, bow here, bow each other, winner," to the other guy. So my first experience in tournaments was not that impressive. I really have to say, but it was eye opening. It was like, okay, so you're here to learn how to defend yourself, and this guy, just beat you every which way. You got some work to do, fella. So it was a motivator, right? Made me
Sure.
realize that I had more work to do, and there's a lot of false confidence that can be gained when you're starting out in the martial arts, and it brought me back down to reality. So I continued competing, and fighting was never my forte, but I always made myself fight. I said, you need to get out there and do this, because you fight people in the dojo, and you're fighting the guys that you fight all the time. They can be hard fighters and all, but they're your dojo mates, and they're not really wanting to hurt you. But you go out and you stand in front of a guy on the other side of the ring, he may just be a jerk and is trying to hurt you, and you've got to be able to protect yourself from that. So I went every tournament I went to. I made myself compete in everything. I competed in forms. I competed when I was doing weapons. I competed in weapons, and I competed in fighting. I just said, this is something that is going to be a learning curve for you, and it's going to take a while. I became the manager of a branch location of Mr. Swan's schools in '73 here in Austin. That's when I moved to Austin. And that was a good experience, but all the students were new. So I was a brown belt at the time, and everybody below me everybody was below me. So when I was fighting them, I was always fighting people who were not as good as me. And so I was in the brown belt tournaments. I was finding myself lacking in fighting as well. So Mr. Swan, he was a good fighter, but that was not what he emphasized. In fact, I'll tell you the one time I was still in San Antonio, and he and I were fighting, and he tells a story about the day that I hit him so hard he thought I broke his nose, right? And I think that's the same day I tell the story about we're fighting, and then all of a sudden he just came alive, and he beat me. He started kicking and punching, beat me back against the wall. I hit the wall. I go down one side. He's kicking and punching me down the other side. Beat me around the whole perimeter of the dojo, and then just stopped, looked at me, and said, "That's enough." He bowed and walked off the mat. And I'm going, okay, well. So I think I put those two stories together. The story about when he says I hit him so hard in the nose, he thought I broke his nose, to that story. So he was a very capable fighter, but that was just not something that he emphasized. He was a great forms and weapons guy. but his partner, a guy named Tony Martinez, not the Mr. Martinez out of Utah,
okay.
right? But a gentleman named Tony Martinez, he was a fighter. He had been a second degree in Mudaquan before he came to Kenpo, and they had fighting in all of their classes. I mean, he always ended the class with fighting, and he was fighting all his guys. So in my brown belt days, and he was living in Austin as well. He was managing his Austin studio. So, I asked him, I said, can you work with me, on some sparring, because I'm not doing real good. And it took me a while to ask him, because I knew it meant, saying, all right, can you just kind of beat the crap out of me for a while until I kind of get this right?
Beat the crap out of me. That's a good Kenpo technique. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and he was more than happy to do it. And finally, one day after one of our sessions, he comes to me and he goes, okay, Brian, here's the deal. He said, we're out there fighting. Okay. And when we're fighting, I'm going to hit you. Now, you can either keep giving it to me for free, like you are right now, or you can hit me back. But either way, I'm going to hit you. So I said, oh, okay, I get it. and he really did help me with my fighting quite a bit, and after working with him, I get more confident, and my fighting in brown and black belt levels were a lot better. So I credit Mr. Martinez with helping me with my freestyle and my sparring. Tournaments were fun for me. I really enjoyed them.
Any ones that were more memorable or stood out for you? Like you felt like that was really, I'm so proud of myself for that.
They were all good. Whether I won or lost, they were all good. Because one of the things that they did for me, they were very motivational. Okay. And remember I said there's a danger of having false confidence, right? Well, there's also a danger of not accepting the actual reality of what's going on.
Right.
There was a tournament. I fought this guy and he beat me. And so afterwards, I'm saying, well, I thought I had, thought I hit you with a few things they didn't count. And he goes, no, you didn't, and he was kind of a jerk, but he starts whining later when he gets beat. And there was this guy who was one of the best brown belts in the state, who said to him, I think this guy's name was Lester, right? Said, Lester, you didn't get robbed, you got beat. He said, Lester, if you're that good, they can't help but give it to you. And that really, that really hit me. Listen, hearing him say that to them, said, that's true. That's what you got to do. You can't worry about the judges. You got to be as good as you possibly can be. And if you are that much better than the other guy, right? Because tournaments are all very subjective. Calling points is subjective. Scoring forms is subjective. Everything is subjective. But your job is not to worry about the judges. Your job is to get out there and be the best that you can be. And if you're that good, then the judges can't help but score it your way. You remember
competing with Dennis Knatzer, Bob White, or any of them?
I didn't compete with Bob White, and Dennis was in Arizona. Most of my tournament stuff in those days was all Texas, Louisiana area. I was regionally rated by Karate Illustrated magazine as a forms and weapons competitor back when they were doing those ratings and stuff. Mm-hmm. And Dennis was always out in Arizona. Bob was in California. I competed at the internationals as a brown belt a couple of times, and I competed at, as a black belt in my early black belt years a couple of times. And it was, I was just one of the throng, I mean, I didn't, I didn't win anything, it wasn't, but I competed in Dennis's tournament. He had the Fiesta Bowl Classic, and I came out, and competed in his tournament, but I never really competed against Dennis in anything,
I understand. Well, let's move on to, so now you're you're in this, I'm guessing the 80s, you're training in Ed Parker, with Mr. Parker. It's very interesting because I was lucky living in the Pasadena area for 12 years. So I saw him on a regular
Yeah.
basis, either at the house, at the school, at a seminar, or right in his car. But the best lessons I ever had were when you ate with the man. That's when the real knowledge came out. No, I mean that sincerely with Frank. Frank wasn't a lot on words, but privately he would say his things. But it was always Mr. Parker. So you're working with Ed Parker. When I came up, Brian, it was 32 techniques per belt, 10 for yellow, and then 32 from orange to green. All right. That's what I learned, plus all the way up to 6 before I was even a first brown. That's how much,
Wow.
I had a lot. I went from white to black in testing less than 2 years. So that's how quick I went up the rank. But they made me
That's
wait a while because Frank
that's
was
very
fast.
unusual.
Yeah, it was. It was a little different, but I didn't know that. I just thought that was how it goes. I didn't know. How would I know? I mean, I'm just newbie going along. So you're working with Ed Parker, and now the structure of the Ed Parker system originally was the 32 techniques per belt. And
Right.
I call that the Old Testament. The Old Testament. Then the New Testament comes along, which is infinite insights and is restructuring of it. And you were paramount, one of the innovators of helping him restructure the 16-20-24 program. Am I correct?
Yes, I designed that program.
Why don't you explain that to the people that are watching this, how 16-20-24 evolved?
Well, when I came into the IKKA, the NCKKA had a older uh, Parker curriculum, probably early '60s curriculum. And so I was looking for the evolution of the techniques. You mentioned Dennis Knatzer. Dennis was a very good influence and friend in the fact that we came up in the NCKK together, but he left very early on, 78 or 9, to study directly with Mr. Parker. And so when we get together, he would compare and contrast the techniques that we were doing in the NCKK with the updated versions of the techniques, so I see what was out there.
Explain updated versions, because I think what they did was they broke down and restructured them to help us understand I call it the base move, and then later on the extensions that were added, or they were always there. They were just broken down to make it more palatable and understandable for the student. That's my understanding, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, when I talk about the updated versions, okay, take the technique, crossing talons. Okay. When I learned crossing talons, it was counter grab, break the arm, cock the arm across, elbow, circle, drop, elbow. That was it. Right. Break, head, back. Okay. And then in the updated version, it was things to fill in the gaps. Right. Those were the 3 major strikes. Right. But you had the break, then you had the elbow, then you had the heel palm claw, fulcrum, circle, elbow, right? And then the knee sandwich. So they were just, the same base movement. You can take a look at, like the difference between long kimono and kimono grab. If you were ever introduced to those, kimono grab was a 2-handed grab, pin, the strike went straight up, the sweep went straight down, and the chop, boom, came out. Okay. And then in the long kimono, the things that were the innovations, right, or counter manipulation of the hand to turn the elbow facing, right, striking up, right, keeping the fist above the elbow as you strike up so that you have more power, like an upward block, circle coming down, canceling height and width as you came down on a 45, and then coming back with the chop. For the untrained eye, this looks very much like this, right? But there's different things in there. So that's what I'm talking about, about the updated versions of them, just a few more principles and concepts to make the things look to work more efficiently.
Sure,
Okay?
they were just the variations, variable expansion and changing of how things could be worked around so that you can adapt to it. Because it was, let's face it, in a matter of a second, you might have to modify something so quickly, and it
Right.
has to be into your intuition's going to take over. Let me ask you this though: when you were structuring it, one of the beautiful things that you incorporated was the web of knowledge.
Yes.
And see, people don't understand that. Why don't you help us understand how that came to be?
Okay. Well, when I came into the IKKA, I was looking for the I love Mr. Parker's art and what he had done, right? But I felt that there was too much of a front end load, and in the fact that you had 10 techniques for yellow, and in the very next belt, you asked them to do 2.5 times as much stuff. Plus, uh, in the NCKK, we had forms and techniques, and then sparring. In the IKK, there was sets, beginning and advance, forms, freestyle techniques, sayings, pledges. There was just a lot of material. So I felt that there was a little bit too much of a front end load. At the time, I was still working as a studio owner full time, and so when Kenpo is a double-edged sword for a studio owner a lot of times, and the fact that there's a lot of material to show to somebody, right? However, you got a school down the street that is promoting their students. Every 3 months they're going for a new belt, right? And you got your guys that are there 6-8 months, with before they're testing for a rank, if they test then. So I felt that stair stepping the material and putting it in a more progressive path would be better for the student. I also there was one other thing that motivated me, and this was a big one. In one of my visits to Mr. Parker, he said, "Okay, I got to do a belt test for these guys." So we went to the studio, Pasadena studio, and there was a school from a little farther north that brought some people down, and it was a black belt test. They went through everything. They went through every technique. They went through the extensions through through black, and some of it was tested for second black. So up through purple belt extensions, and they did it all. But when I observed them, to me, there wasn't a lot of good articulation in what they were doing. There was a lot of movement there, but it just looked to me like the emphasis was being put too much on quantity instead of quality of movement. And I felt that it's tough. And as I said, you're unusual in having gotten all that material in 2 years. I hooked Mr. Parker up with some guys that were helping him with the new franchise idea. And at the time, the industry standard for a black belt club was a 3-year program, and he wanted to institute black belt clubs, 3-year black belt program in his studios. And his what I heard from the people who I knew that were out there said that his guys were saying, it ain't going to work. We can't get a guy to black belt in 3 years, and he was saying, oh yeah, we can. And so the franchise guy said, okay, well, there's an easy way to figure this out. How many people have you had make black belt in 3 years? And he thought for a second. He said, well, none. But that just means they're not working hard enough, right? So there's a lot of material, but when you have so much material, it's hard to really work on building solid basics, in my opinion. I felt it was better to have fewer requirements at the beginning, and then as they had that base established of good solid basics, Then when you moved in the brown belt, you could require 20 techniques. When you moved to the extensions, you could do 24 techniques.
Sure.
So, and I was not the only one who thought this way. There were other people who had tried to shorten the requirements, but a lot of them, what they did, I mean, there are other 16 technique people, but they would take the first 16 from orange, and then for the next rank, they take the last 8 from orange and the first 8 from purple, and for the next rank, take the last 16 for purple. So I said, no, the web of knowledge is based upon, grab, push, punch, kicks, hugs and hold, locks and chokes, weapons, multiples, right? And that's how it's supposed to be introduced. So I took all of the material, and when I restructured it, I put them, my restructure is all within the web of knowledge. So the material goes, all first 8 techniques: grab, push, punch, kick, hugs and holds, locks and chokes, weapons, and then it repeats as it goes on. So that was something different in the restructure. Now, when I presented this restructure to Mr. Parker, I sent it to him, and in a letter, and said, I don't want to, I hope I'm not overstepping my bounds, sir, but, here's my feelings. I think that this could be a better situation. And at the time, the Infinite Insights had just been published between 82 and 87. I sent this material out to him in, I think, late 88, maybe early 89. And because, the Infinite Insights delineated the 24 technique curriculum as the standard curriculum, he was not interested in changing. In fact, he said, okay, well, if this will help you, then you can use it. And I said, great. So I started using it with my guys. That's probably where it would have ended, right there, just me and my guys doing that, right? But about a year later, he contacted me about a children's curriculum. Okay. And I told him, I said, well, I have a children's curriculum that works, but it works in concert with my 16, 20, 24 structure. It does not work in concert with your 24 structure. And he said, okay, send it back to me and send me the children's curriculum with it. So I sent him back all my material with the integrated children's curriculum, right? And because it had something that he was looking for, this time he studied it, more. First time when I sent it to him, like I say, 24 technique was in the Infinite Insights. He said, okay, fine. If this will help you, go ahead. This time he studied it, and he got back with me. He said, look, I like what you've done. He said, sure. Here's the problem. He said, people who have been doing the 24 technique for a long time are going to be very reticent to change. They're not going to want to do that. He said, however, I intend to start doing franchise schools again, and I want to use this curriculum in my franchise schools. And I said, great. That's wonderful.
And what? Now it's just a testimony to the Parker mindset, because he was always the thinking martial artist. And it makes sense. There's funny. I like to quote him a lot, because then you can't contradict it. It's his words. But here's a funny thing that would support you right now. In the Zen of Kenpo, he said, although a new idea may be sound, it is difficult to obtain approval from everyone.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's more from that idea. From talking to Edmund, Edmund says that they were planning on rolling that out the year after he died in 91. Okay. I met John Sepulveda at Mr. Parker's funeral. I knew of John Sepulveda through Mr. LeBounty, and one of my students had moved back to California, was training with John Sepulveda, but I'd never met the man. So we met at Mr. Parker's funeral, and we decided to, go back and forth. And I was going to do a seminar at his school. He's going to come and do a seminar at my school. We'd interact. Well, he was going to come out to Texas first. He came out to Texas in June. And when he comes out, he says, hey, have you seen this? And he gives me a manual for the orange belt that's in the 16 technique format. And I said, yeah, I wrote it. And he said, what? I said, yeah, that's my structure, and I pulled out my files, and I showed him all the, all the letters I had sent to Mr. Parker and whatnot, and so Mr. Parker would always test drive stuff. Right. So he had sent a copy to John. He'd sent a copy to Dennis Knatzer. I know he sent one to Brian Hawkins, I think. And there, there are other people that he sent, copies out to. So, so I'm, and Mr. Parker's words have come true. I mean, the 16-20-24 technique curriculum has been embraced by a lot of people, but there are a lot of people that just don't embrace it at all and consider it watering down the art,
Well,
so
I have to disagree with that premise. I grew up in the 32. You're still receiving the material. It is just spread out. It's like
correct.
going to the buffet. I'm hungry. You're hungry. You and I decide we're going to go to Caesar's. We're going to eat their buffet. There's like 5 or 10 different variations of foods, from Chinese, Italian, American, whatever. Are you going to sit there and try to eat all of them at one time?
Yeah.
No. You try to do that, you're going to get sick and die. But if you can get the gold pass because you play a lot at the slot machines, you get to go every day for a week. I promise you, you'll be able to eat something from all of them, and you'll accomplish what you need. You'll have nutrition. You'll have your palate will be under. You'll have a better understanding of what foods you like and whatnot. But you got all of it. It wasn't denied to you. But to sit there and try to eat it all one time is insane. So I can understand where you're coming. That's why when I grew up, I had the 32s, but we had the entire technique as it was taught, which later
Right.
deciphered into making, they said this is the extension. A great example is Dance of Death. That would be a good one because
Yes.
yes, it has
When you
all
teach
that.
when you teach the base technique to the student at what is it, yellow belt level, he's going for orange. You're teaching them Dance of Death. They're kind of wondering, why is this called Dance of Death? Because you don't get to the dance part until you get to the extension.
Exactly. Well, it's and besides, let's face it, Mr. Parker always used to say, how effective are you in the first 2 or 3 moves? He was
Right.
always looking for the multiple attackers, the hyenas that were going to jump out and attack him. Honestly, that was another reason why he didn't really spend a lot of time, even though he did come from judo, which is a very beautiful, martial art, but he didn't like being on the ground because he knew once he was on the ground, he was a complete disadvantage.
And he didn't like tying up his hands on one person for too long.
Yeah, he's on the ground rolling with the guy and he's got a problem. The other 3 or 4 jump on top of them. It's not like a Bruce Lee movie where they're systematically boom, 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 boom. And he knows they're coming. We've shot this only 10 times in a row and they're all waiting.
Right.
They're jumping around in the background, which Trejo used to always make fun and have a good time with it. Frank had a wonderful sense of humor. I got to tell you, I have so many stories of being in Pasadena with Mr. Parker showing up at the most inappropriate times for us. And I will leave it at that.
Okay.
But there was truly a love between those 2 men. And I was very lucky to be there in a front seat to see all the greats they come in. So you're working with the development of the 16-20-24, and that has blossomed into pretty much, I would think, the progressive new standard of the Ed Parker system. And honestly, kudos to you. I think it's brilliant. Mr. Parker saw it, and you know what? He realized the importance and the significance of it and why it was so important for the students to do that. Plus, it helps the instructors to give them a curriculum that can be spread out. You don't want to try to learn all of American history in one course. It's not going to happen. You got to expand it and learn. There's much more to this.
I agree. And that's why, that was my reasoning in putting it together, right? A more progressive way of introducing the material. And as a student gets a better foundation in the basics, then they are able to take more material because that material will be done with that good, strong, basic foundation.
Right. And the way you structured it, it follows Mr. Parker's writings. Like I said, the infinite insights, and there's a rationale for it. So people will say, oh, gee whiz, I know why he wants us to do it this way. It sort of helps us with, the deal with it. So, all you have to do, and I'm going to go right to it right now, because I'm always a fan of doing this kind of stuff, as if you've watched me. I always like to use some kind of reference. And it's a
Okay.
foundational thing that I learned a long time ago. But if you go to Infinite Insights and you look at the volume 5, okay? Volume 5,
Okay.
which you can see I've written, my books are a mess. I don't know if you would like my books because they're all written and inscribed and beat up and everything. But you get into book 5 and you think, okay, why does Mr. Parker want me to read this book? Well, you go there and you go into you go right into this and you look at chapter 5, the nature of the attack. What's he talking about? The web of knowledge.
Right.
He knows how to read the web of knowledge and the knowledge for belt requirement. Then he goes on the analytical study of motion. Everything you're talking about is reinforced by his own writings. So it's nothing like it's like somebody made this up out of, grab it out of the air and say, oh, Brian Duffy decided we need to do this. No, I think what you did was you just organized it and structured so it followed his thinking process in his writings. And it's a natural progression of it. What is the probably pick 2 of the greatest lessons that Ed Parker ever taught you? 2 of them. They could be fun. They could be serious. They could be what affected you. Oh, it must be good. You're laughing.
Well, I'll tell you another funny story. Yeah. Again, I, when I first started working with him, I'm working on the terminology and the principles and the concepts, and so I was trying to talk about the relationship between proper body alignment and backup mass. And so I said, so the way I see it, Mr. Parker, is that, proper body alignment is basically backup mass, and he said, proper body alignment puts backup mass into perspective. So I think for a second, I go, yeah, so what you're saying then is that proper body alignment is backup mass. And he says, proper body alignment puts backup mass into perspective. And so I think again, well, to me, that means that proper body alignment is backup mass. It gets kind of this.
Oh, yes, I know that.
Proper body alignment puts backup mass into perspective. So at that point in time, I said to myself, okay, stupid. This man is obviously putting this in as simple terms as he possibly can, and you're not getting it. So you can either just beat this to death like you're doing now and appear to be more stupid, or we can go on to something different. So then I went on to something different. And then I was teaching a lesson to a student a couple of days later, and they're standing there in a horse stance. You're teaching them how to do a punch, and you're telling them to keep their elbow in, so the line from the elbow through the knuckle is on a straight line to the target, and that way that puts all the mass behind the punch of the arm. And Mr. Parker's face, boom, goes up, says, proper body alignment puts backup mass into perspective.
Sure.
And I finally got what he was saying. It's something that I had been teaching my students for years and years, but I just had not been putting it in the language that he used.
And that's
so
terminology, and that you're right. I have battles. I have battles with Knatzer on this stuff. So sometimes, I will frustrate him. But what I would do now is I break down the word proper. That word. Okay, explain property, body alignment. Please explain those 2 to me. Will, and I break them down on him. I don't get away with that. And I would do the same. I would do the same thing with Ed Parker if he was right here right now. I said, please break that word down. And one of my big peeves I have right now, and for those that are out there disagree with me, yeah, it's the beauty of what we do. We like to talk. We are a thinking art. Ed Parker's number one thought and his purpose was to make sure that we're thinkers, not just doers. He doesn't want to see a bunch of robots, because what we'll do is we'll try to put a square peg in a round hole at the wrong time. And guess who gets put in the round hole? Us. Yeah. Okay. So I have a problem with this. I like the thought. Remember one time we had a conversation. He may have said this to you as well. He said, Paul, if you can walk away from the fight, you've won the fight. You don't have to fight. You can come back another day, which in other words, he was paraphrasing Sun Tzu, the art of war through deception. If you can fight without fighting, you've won, which is a brilliant analogy, but most people think I'm going to be a black belt. I got to fight. I got to get there. I got to punch the guy out. My problem is today is that we have an issue with escalation of violence.
Right.
When do we start to go? And a lot of people don't understand that the Kenpo basis is we are heavy into jujitsu, heavy into that. The striking elements seem to take a lot of precedent over people because we like to see somebody do 5 swords or this thundering hammers or, something with a sweep and takedown, whatever. Frank was big on that stuff. But if you think about it and you look at, say, delayed sword, and you think about it, you can just, if you do it right, you can take this guy down with with very little efforts in a compliance type of response without striking him. Do you understand what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying. And people don't get that. We don't always have to punch the lights out of the dude in front of us, poke his eyes out, crush his kneecap, shatter his jaw just because he called us a jerk for taking that parking space or cut in front of him,
Like Yellow Belt saying, number 2, whatever the attitude, so the response.
Exactly. I think the thing is that as escalates, and you look at this in the understanding, Mr. Parker wants you to think, just because you have knowledge and you come in there, doesn't mean you have wisdom.
True.
And that's the problem we see today. And right now, I don't want to go to jail for beating the living crap out of somebody because then my little guy has to worry about daddy being, singing the jailhouse rock or something.
Yeah. And it's just like Mr. LeBounty said, there's no winners and losers. There's just survivors,
Exactly.
And, if you can walk away from it, you survived, plus, let's say you and I get in a fight. I break your nose. You knock my tooth out. Who won? Nobody. We both lost.
The dentist and the doctor that has to fix those things.
There you go.
The money office, So, but I think that's about Parker. There was a lot of anecdotes that he would give if you were smart enough to understand he was saying them to you, and I was lucky to be around that. And what I'm talking firsthand, which is brilliant to share that. And I'm so happy that you've shared some of these stories with us. I know that you've reached out and now you've been in the martial arts for a very long time, and your contributions are immeasurable. You have a lot of people that are very supportive of you, and they've said to me, congratulations, and they will be recognizing you in just a few weeks at this wonderful ceremony. It's going to be an amazing group of individuals there. And
I'm very honored to be. I've seen some of the names on that list, and I'm honored to be a part of that.
Well, you were chosen by your peers, and that's how it works. So let's talk about Brian Duffy's impact outside of Texas. I know you're involved in South America, and you've done some things over in Europe and whatnot. You want to touch briefly on that?
Sure. As far as Europe goes, I got a chance to, back in '94, I was a regional director for the IKKA, and that put me in touch with a much larger group of people, to be quite honest with you, and made some great connections. But one of the things that I saw after Mr. Parker died, everybody started breaking off and doing their own thing, and one of the and that's good. People have a right to go their own way. But one of the downsides to that is that there wasn't as much interaction between various different people anymore. It was staying in their own separate groups. And so I hosted a camp in '94, and I called it the American Kenpo Homecoming Camp. And it was open to anybody from any organization or system. And I had Mr. LeBounty, Mr. Kelly, John Sepulveda, Bob Lyles, Frank Trejo, Huck Planis, Jeff Speakman, Gary Swan, Barbara Hale was there. And we had like 15 people. Dennis Canasser was there, myself. There were 15 people, 5th degree or higher, which back in '94 was, pretty high. And I had when the word got out about who was going to be there, right, I had people from all over the United States that came, and I had also Eddie Downey from Ireland brought three or four of his guys, and three guys and Eddie, yeah, and then also this young man from England who we had met the year before at the internationals came, you know, so I had people from overseas as well. It was a great event. At that event, the American Kenpo Senior Council came about with Mr. LeBounty, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Planis, Mr. Trejo, John Spolvin, and Bob Lyles being the top six in the organization. But one of the good things was I had Eddie Downey come over and stay with me before the camp. He stayed at my house, and so did Simon Mycock, was a gentleman from England. And Eddie said to me, he said, well, would you be interested in coming over to Ireland, you know, and doing a seminar? I said, well, yeah, that'd be great, you know. So I was thinking on down the way. About 2 weeks after the camp, when he got back, he calls me up and says, we'd like to have you come. This was in April that we did the camp. We'd like to have you come in June. And I've also talked to the guys in England, and they want you for a week as well. You know, so in '94, I had an opportunity to go teach in Ireland for a week and teach in England for a week. You know, Eddie and John and the two Burgess brothers were very great hosts while we were there. And I met a lot of guys in Ireland, and then in England, it was Merv Orman, Jackie McVicker, and Gary Ellis were the three that hosted me there. And I was treated just wonderfully, you know, so that was a once in a lifetime opportunity, you know, and I took my wife with me, and it's still, you know, 30 years later, it's still one of our favorite, you know, memories of being there in Ireland and England for that week. Then fast forward, during the international, or during my period as an IKKA regional director, the regional directors meetings were held at the IKC. And so I decided to start competing again, right? I hadn't competed in 9 years. I'd retired, but I said, well, if I'm going to be out there at the IKC, I might as well compete, you know? So whenever I went out for the regional directors meeting, I would compete at the IKC, and I had a pretty good run there. I did, I took first place 5 different years in forms, and second place 1 year, and third place another in forms. And I took a third place in individual fighting 1 year. And I was on a couple of black belt teams, a couple of old man teams that we took second. So, you know, I had a good run in the 90s, you know, but then after that was over and I was no longer in the IKKA, I kind of put competing behind me as well. And then I got an invitation in 2006 to become a member of the U.S. Kenpo team that competes at the World Kenpo Championships. It's from the International Kenpo Federation. They have a world championship, you know, and I looked at the information, and it's based upon the Olympic model, and the fact that, you know, you go as a team from your country, you compete for individual medals, but, you know, you're competing for the team's placement as well. And, you know, that was something I'd never done. You know, my competition days were always, you know, representing either the system or myself or my school, right? And a chance to represent my country, you know, was, you know, an opportunity that I wanted to try to do. So I accepted the opportunity. I went to Budapest, Hungary in 2007 to compete at the World Kenpo Championships. And I competed in 6 events, I think, or 5 events. I competed in forms. I competed in weapons. I competed in empty hand self-defense. I competed in weapon self-defense. I competed in our team self-defense, and I competed in fighting. I had 6 events, you know. And like I say, I was always mainly a forms guy. You know, I did fighting. I did okay, but it was not what I excelled in. So if you would have asked me before I left to rate, you know, what I would have won something in, you know, fighting would have been at the end of it, you know. So I get over there. I hadn't competed in 9 years. And the month before I was getting ready to leave, I was trying to get myself back in shape. My wife had an operation. She had her appendix didn't burst, but it was leaking. So she had to go in. They took out her appendix and they took out 4 inches of her large intestine. I mean, it was a pretty extensive operation. So I had to stop my training and take care of her. So I didn't get myself back in as good a shape as I thought I was gonna. So I get out there and I'm doing my stuff. I do my form and I'm kind of gassing out, so the judges are like, yeah, I do my weapons form, and I'm doing a Chinese saber set, and most of the guys there are all, hard style weapons, guys,
Right.
and those are the ones that are winning. They're kind of, oh, nice, good, okay, next, and we get out, we beat the crud out of each other in the self-defense, and beat the crud out of each other in the weapons self-defense and the team self-defense. And it's a 3-day tournament. And so, at the end of all of the first 5 events, I've got nothing, and I said, I think I've come a long way to figure out that this is something that I used to be pretty good at, and so I said to the captain of our team, I said, I think I'm done. I'm not going to fight, And he goes, what? You're not going to fight? I said, nah, I think this pretty much proves to me, that my days are gone. My glory days are gone. And so then I see him start to fight. And there's different types of fighting. There's semi-contact, which is like our tournament fighting. And then they do a full contact. Then they do a knockdown, which is barehanded, but you can't punch the head, kind of like Kyokushinkai.
Yeah,
type,
I've seen that.
right? And so I had entered the semi-contact, but I'd not entered the full contact. I see him get out there, do the semi. I said, oh, I can do this. Okay, fine. I'm going to fight, and I went out. I took the gold medal in the semi-contact fighting, for my age and weight.
Congratulations.
And so at age 54, I ended up being a world champion. Right. And so I competed there in Budapest in 2007. In 2008, we went to Faro, Portugal, and I competed and I won a couple silvers and a couple bronze. And then I went to Romania in 2009, and my son went with me as well there. And I took a silver in fighting. I lost the gold medal match, but I took a silver in fighting and bronzes in the forms and the self-defense stuff. So yeah. It was very, very rewarding to
congratulations and thank you for sharing that. The beautiful thing about it, Brian, is that your career is so diversified. There's so many nuances to it. There's so much there that you're sharing, and I hope that the people see this can be inspired that just because you reach a certain age doesn't mean your career is over. It all starts with the mindset. That was the first lesson actually Frank ever taught me. He watched me fight, and I was a green belt in 78. I was a young guy, and he looked at me and he said, there's 2 battles, the one in your mind and the one in the ring. And he was right, so
yeah.
you don't give up.
Yeah.
And it's a metaphor for life, because let's face it, when you look at it and collectively, Parker says, I'm going to quote him 2 more things before we close out. And it's truly been an honor to talk to you. And this will just sum it all up. Strive for the best, settle for nothing less. Ed Parker, the Zen of Kenpo. And that is truly what you represent. You're truly a champion in so many ways. Your peers admire you. Your competitors respect you. And I am truly honored to have you on here. Thank you, Master Brian Duffy. You're an amazing man. I'm truly looking forward to seeing you here in Las Vegas when you're inducted into the 2021 Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame. All the best.
It's an honor to be included. Thank you very much for having me for the interview. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. And this is the most I've ever heard out of you. This is great. Thank you so much. Be safe. I look forward to seeing you in just a few weeks.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.